I found it very interesting what President-elect Trump said when he was congratulated by Joe Biden. And seeing as I started writing comedy again, I wrote about 10 bits since last night, and it's really put me in a different kind of mood. I'm not fostering any illusions about the coming Trump administration, and I've been uh, a pretty staunch critic of the man. Um, Sometimes to the extent that I think it could cause me real trouble in the future, especially if my social media presence uh, increases in notoriety or um, infamy. Uh, but I actually was inspired to be engendered with some hope and compassion, believe it or not. And I'll tell you why. There's a specific reason, and you might have to actually give me this because it's personal. So, when I was growing up, there were some guys that I didn't take easily to, but also with whom I didn't have any real problem. They were basically the hooligans, right? There was Jimmy Wall, Peter Gallagher, Frank Cadiz, Mike Ryder, not the pilot enthusiast, school psychologist Mike Ryder, another Mike Ryder, an Irishman, of course. Um, and there may have been a few others. Eric Marchetta, rest in peace. Uh, and these guys never gave me too much of a hard time, even though I was a nerd about space and science, and I was very shy. I didn't date till I got out of high school, although there were girls that I really fancied. You know who you are. um, But occasionally they were kind of cruel in how they hazed. And I later became best friends with a guy, Chris Barbaria, who wasn't too different from those guys, but a lot kinder and a lot more sensible. So he didn't bring things to extremes. Maybe Ernie Sisto, but you never bothered me. The thing is, sometimes these guys, the way they hazed was something that guys like I did not understand. I didn't figure this out until later when I became good friends with Chris Barbaria, that it's a form of affection. And so one time, Kenny Kowalski, also rest in peace, I was knocking on his door one morning to walk to school with him. This was elementary school. And he came out with a meat cleaver and he chased me down the street. Another time, on the way home from school, he grabbed my jacket, which I'd had under my arm, and he put it in dog shit and he stepped on it. Now, this stuff is pretty mean, right? But it didn't comport with the rest of their behavior. So it was just as if they were possessed at times. Frank Cadiz used to go past my parents' house on the corner of Norwich and Cedar before my parents were able to afford to paint it and aluminum side it, and he used to yell out, "You live in a barn!" Right? Meanwhile, he lived in a bungalow-sized house on Stark's Place, which really looked like a piece of Brooklyn in the Five Towns. I didn't hate any of these guys. And probably because I played sports, I managed to tick by and not become a major victim of their ridicule. But the truth is, they didn't beat up people. They weren't like the bullies that you hear about in Japan or around the United States. Um, they were just wise guys. I remember Jimmy Wall used to sit in the back of science class, Shirley Shuckman's class. She was a heavy-set woman who had fungus on her thumbs. And she talked like this. And he would do this. "I say bullshit." You know, and then, I mean, they were so recalcitrant, these guys, that when the teacher said something to them, they would say stuff like, "What? What are you talking about? I didn't do anything. I sneezed." Like they were completely in denial or pretended to be. And today, when I heard Trump say to Biden, sitting there, very like Peck's bad boy, with his hand across his chest to hold his jacket closed as he shook Biden's hand, which reminded me of how in Korea we would put one hand on the other arm when handing something to an elder or a superior, or how we would turn to drink and put one hand on the drinking hand. Of course, that's my projecting, but he seemed to be very deferential at that moment, right? Now, I'm not, again, saying that I don't think he's going to be a disaster for our country. The economists say it, the political analysts say it, the ones that aren't on Fox News or being paid, or the ones who want to escape his scorn and retribution. the real serious people. I know it's going to be a disaster. Everybody knows this. The entire world knows this, right? I know people who are setting up underground railroads to save people that he might want to deport at the pain of military extradition or abduction or whatever you want to call it, arrest. But I'm just talking on a human level. He said this to Biden. And to me, it sounded like a heavily veiled apology and a recognition that they're just two guys playing a fucking game. He said, Biden congratulated him, you know, in his whispery kind of voice. I wrote a lot of comedy last night, so he said, politics is tough, and in many cases it's not a nice world, but it's a very nice world today, and I appreciate it very much. A transition so smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate it. And I think it was probably the first time in a very long time that he was up close to Biden, and he was probably realizing this is a really old man. I mean, I don't have any money right now, but I'd give a ton if I had it to know what he was thinking. And I bet he was feeling shame. I don't think the man is without shame. I think, as I've been saying all along, in between my castigation of him, that he's been desperate for a very long time. And he is afraid of going to jail. But back to the real tenor of my realization, he made me think of the hooligan friends I had growing up. Those guys who seemed like bullies but weren't, could act the part, but as far as I know, never did. I don't know if they ever got into fistfights in other towns or in the city, or if they ever hurt anybody. But when I was growing up, before I had my realizations about humanity, I just thought they were jerky guys. But I didn't hate them. And Trump seemed like one of those guys. To me, he seemed like, and I'm going to bleed one of my punchlines here, he seemed like an angry young boy who found himself stuck in a fat suit. And you can add all of the bells and whistles to that fat suit. The poor upbringing emotionally with his father and grandfather, the really bad lessons that he learned, the assuagement of whom he was. I mean, let's face it, we made Donald Trump, right? Eli Mistal wrote a really good piece in The Nation about how he's us. And some of us were saying this in 2016. Some of us who have always been critical of the United States while still loving it. He is the reflection of the American people. He is the symptom. He's not the cause, although he's becoming the cause. And he seems to me like a guy who would just like to be a nice guy. It's just that he's really rough around the edges. And if we might be nice to him, you know, grit our teeth and be nice to him, which I also said in 2016 before he started to double down on his poor choice of words about Mexicans and so on. All we have to do is give him complete control. He's one of those guys. He's one of those guys who will treat you just fine, basically. But as soon as you upset him, you know, he's going to come crashing through the window and he's going to take everybody with him that he can and sail off, you know, the 54th floor, because he knows that he's got a bunch of lackeys and assholes at the bottom who are going to catch him, you know, in one of those big fireman's trampoline things. Those are my thoughts for today. So if you want to have an easier Trump administration, you don't stop fighting. You don't stop trying to save our institutions and democracy. You don't put up with his bullshit. But I'm starting to realize that the more you bullshit him and placate him and make him feel good, and this has been said many times by many analysts, the better he's going to behave. Because he's really just a big wounded child.